Hello everyone. So today we're going to be looking at the Kutuzov, the Mikhail Kutuzov. I had a really good game recently, so I want to showcase it. So the map's it's a tier 9 game. We're on Mountain Range, and I'm playing with Grusky and Nomus Taters. So before we get into the action, I'm just going to go over my build. I've only got a 17-point captain on the Mikhail Kutuzov. The first skill I take is Priority Target, followed by Adrenaline Rush. The turrets on the Kutuzov turn quite quickly, so you don't need Expert Marksman. Then I'd follow that up with Superintendent. Demolition Expert is tempting, but Superintendent's more useful because it gives you an additional smoke, and you only have 2 with the premium consumable. Then for my fourth skill, I took IFHE. You can get away with IFHE because of your smoke screen. However, if you're using this on other Russian cruisers, it may be worthwhile taking Concealment Expert first. I would still recommend IFHE first though, because damage equals more experience, which equals quicker progression. After that, I picked up Concealment Expert, since I picked up IFHE first, followed by Demolition Expert. For my 19th point, I will spend it probably on Jack of all trades, although at that point it's not hugely important. Now if we move on to the modules, I run Main Armaments Mod 1 to increase the survivability of your main turrets. Defensive AA, because the AA on the Kutuzov is extremely strong, and if you're in a carrier game, it's a major strength. And then AA range, because the guns are quite accurate, although taking the reduced dispersion is another perfectly legitimate option here. Then I take acceleration, because you do tend to move around your smoke screen quite a bit. However, rudder shift is also a good option there. And then finally, for my last module, I take the concealment module, which you should take on all tier 8 plus ships. For flags, the only ones I'm running are fire chance flags, and then commander XP at the moment. Other than that, you could consider the one that reduces consumable usage, or the one that increases speed as well. But the fire chance ones are very important, because you basically spam HE most of the time when you're playing the Kutuzov. So when we were actually playing this game, we were sailing towards sea, because I tend to sail towards areas with island cover, particularly when you're in a lightly armored cruiser like a Kutuzov. The only caveat is that the Kutuzov can handle itself quite well in open water, just because of its really good arcs. However, as you can see from the map, the enemy team was actually pushing towards A mostly, so as we get in, it's about this point that Grusky and I realized that we're pushing into an empty flank. So at that point, we made the decision to simply push straight through C and basically get up north towards the D8 area so we could get a flanking position. In fact, I said this was a tier 9 game, but there are only 1 tier 9 ships on each team, and the St. Louis was the enemy team's tier 9. Could exchange a little bit of fire here, but it's not particularly effective due to the range and the speed of the St. Louis. Also, many of you may know that recently there was a smoke change that was seen as a nerf to the Kutuzov. If you play the Kutuzov carefully, you will not really notice it too much. Basically, the smoke firing detection range for the Kutuzov is 7.7 kilometers, which is brutally high for a 152mm armed cruiser. Also here, I make a major misplay. This smoke screen. Generally when I lay smoke screens, you want to have the enemy more than 10 kilometers away from you, but you want to have multiple targets that are being spotted by other people while you're smoking up. But here I've only got 1 target, and it's a pretty hard target to hit, and there are no battleships to spam, and also I'm not coming under fire, so this is just a bad smoke screen. I basically wasted my first smoke screen here. And I'm just going to continue shooting at the St. Louis for a little bit. Our team did get off to an early advantage because our Neptune and one of our destroyers were able to knock out 2 of their destroyers, which allowed us to take all 3 caps, and that early cap advantage is actually critical in this game because by the end it comes down to a very close margin. So at this point, Grusky's moving up to try and defend B cap to help the Benson as well. And when he's going up, I'm soon going to ask him for a smokescreen because his American smokes last for an extremely long time. And at this point, I'm moving up a couple kilometers, so I'm in range of all these battleships. Another thing that I like to point out is that the Kutuzov is actually an incredibly strong ship without the smokescreen. Just the long-range guns and an IFHE are enough to make it into an incredibly powerful cruiser, but the smokescreen makes it potentially ridiculous in certain games. Another thing to be aware of is that some people might encourage you to forego IFHE on ships like this, but IFHE is extremely useful on all guns between 150 and about 180 millimeters. So all the Russian cruisers except for the Moskva should have IFHE because it allows you to go past a breakpoint. So with IFHE, 6-inch guns can penetrate 32 millimeters of armor. And that armor threshold is really important because all tier 8 plus battleships have 32 millimeter bow and stern plating at most. It also allows you to penetrate 25 and 27 millimeters, I believe, which are important breakpoints on cruisers and lower tier battleships. And here I'm going to target Colorado. Colorados are probably one of the most juicy targets for an IFHE armed cruiser because they have a lot of 25 millimeter or so thickness armor all over them. Also, they've got a huge superstructure and they're slow and easy to hit. And you can see that I'm getting 2,000 to 3,000 damage per salvo, as well as some fires. So this is more like what the first smoke should have been. As you can see, I've already racked up 20,000 damage in the first couple 30 seconds or so of being in a smoke screen. And if you smoke up carefully, you can usually get about 20 to 30,000 damage per smoke screen. Also, by smoking up at ranges greater than 10 kilometers from the nearest enemy, not only does that prevent you from being spotted by enemy destroyers, it also generally prevents you from being torpedoed by enemy destroyers, which is why I can get away without running Hydro. There was also a 4-man group from a single clan, that IFHE group, and so I do try to focus them a bit here, but they mostly did a pretty good job. And I think most of them are alive by the end of the game.
Smoke generator started.
Grusky's smoke runs out, so I use one of my own, because this position is extremely strong right now. I've got plenty of targets, and they're all staying spotted. This is ideal Kutuzov time play. Basically, just sit in a smoke screen and spam HE as long as you need to. I briefly run out of targets, so I take a quick pot shot at the Turpins, but I think the King George V is about to sail around that island, so I'll switch back after I take a few shots at this Turpins. Also, British battleships are pretty ideal targets for IFHE. They also tend to have a lot of minimum thickness armor, as well as lots of big superstructure. That was a really bad salvo because I missed mostly. But there we're looking at almost 5,000 damage per salvo with HE, and I'm able to do that every 8 seconds. So you can really destroy British battleships incredibly quickly. Although I don't actually kill this guy. Now here I'm running out of smoke screen and Grusky's too far south to support me with another one, so I'm going to have to play some open water kiting while I wait for my smoke screen to come off cooldown. But I mean, that's fine. One of my most successful games in the Kutuzov was when I was forced to play open water kiting pretty much the entire game and spot my own targets. Didn't matter, I just stayed at 15 kilometers and the enemy weren't able to hit me back. Now again, you'll notice that I'm zooming out between shots, always checking the battleships below me, just to make sure they don't get a good side shot into me. Enemy Tirpitz comes around the corner, but he looks like he might be about to run away. There's my Witherer. And we're only up to 147,000 damage now, which is a good but not extraordinary game for the Kutuzov, and I haven't actually got a kill yet. But this hippers are really low targets, so I do focus on it quickly. Then there's the high caliber. And then I get the kipper.
Enemy cruiser foundered.
One of the things that you'll notice that the enemy Kutuzov was firing a lot of AP at me. And that's probably a large part of why I won, or did I survive this game. If he'd been firing HE, I would probably have died, because all he has to do is set some fires, get my repair down, and then he's doing permanent damage to me. But he fired AP, and Kutuzov AP can be incredibly powerful at close range, but as a general rule of thumb, I wouldn't use it above 10 kilometers, and only if you get a really broadside target, battleship or cruiser. Destroyer, always fire HE. Cruiser at mid to long range, fire HE. Battleship at most ranges, fire HE. Broadside, cruiser at very short range, you can use AP and you can be very devastating, but the AP is incredibly situational. Also, Royal Navy cruisers, you can pretty reliably set it out to as far as maybe 12 kilometers, maybe a little bit farther. But in general, concentrate on your HE, it's going to be what you use 90% of the time. In fact, I think in this game I don't switch ammo types once. So at this earlier in this game it had looked, I was very confident we were going to win, but at this point we're clearly going to lose, it seems. And the only way to prevent that is to hold on to B as long as possible and prevent them from taking C. Because thanks to that early cap advantage, we have a massive points lead, but the enemy have a huge numerical superiority because the other flank of our team didn't do very well at all. So the Knights now just took a torpedo to the nose, which means he's definitely repaired. So at this point you have to maintain focus on this target until you've got multiple fires on him to really get large amounts of damage and kill him. One thing you should know is that if you ever take a torpedo to the bow or the stern, that's a guaranteed flood because there's no torpedo protection there. So when you see something like that, you can 100% know that repair was used. So now he's on fire in 2 places, and that's almost enough to kill him. 3 places. Another thing to understand is that fires by base, I think, do about 18% of your health and damage against a battleship. So, and with skills and modules, the best you can get is 9%. So, yeah, he's dead now, but at minimum, unrepaired fires are going to do 9% fire, 9% of their health and damage. Also, sometimes at high tier, for example, when you're fighting GKs, it's quite tempting not to set multiple fires because people tend to let a single fire burn, and you can get a lot of damage done if you set multiple ships on fire in a single place. For example, if you set a single uncontrollable fire on a GK, that's between 12 and 20,000 damage usually. So the enemy St. Louis is about to die. I swap fire to the Tirpitz. Again, just trying to prevent them from taking B. Our Benson did an excellent job this game, but unfortunately I think he's going to die quite soon. There he goes. Killed by the King George V, who also had an extremely good game. He actually gets a Kraken in the end. Now Grusky's got Torps out on the Tirpitz, and I think he hits some. Killing this guy is critical to preventing them from capping it B quickly. So Grusky dies. He hits the Tirpitz with Torps, and before disappearing, I make sure I kill the Tirpitz. So at this point I'm in a 5 versus 1 situation. So there is a solo warrior up for grabs at this point. There I set the Tirpitz on fire, which is a guaranteed kill. So I can stop shooting at him. I also get set on fire, but I instantly repair it because I don't have any health to spare on fire damage. Here the Kutuzov's firing at me. He's 16 kilometers away and he's firing AP. Like I said before, that's never going to work. Particularly when I'm evading and angling at the same time. 0 damage. If he'd fired HE, he might have got a fire, which would be permanent damage. So when I was actually playing this game, I did not realize how close the game was being over on time. In fact, I think it was Grusky or Noms who reminded me that we've actually only got 2.5 minutes left. So at this point, I could quite easily survive. It's going to take them a while to kill me. Now here I spot the Prince Eugen. He's again trying to capture B, so I'm going to try to defend it, but a little bit too late, unfortunately. Now Prince Eugen's German, so it has really good AP in general with high alpha. So he's going to be firing AP at me, usually, but instead he fires HE. But it's important to stay angled against German cruisers because they don't have great auto bounce angles, but they do have very high alpha that can punish you super quickly. There you saw the power of the Kutuzov's HE versus cruisers. I'm doing 4,000 to 6,000 damage per salvo with HE against an angled Eugen. So he's hurting, but unfortunately he's got a lot more health than I do, and also much more support. There's the King George V I was firing at earlier. This is a good example of how worthless Kutuzov HG can be. Like I had that guy down to 20,000 health, and he's already back up to 40,000. So all that penetration and fire damage I did got repaired back over time, so I didn't actually do any useful damage to him. So you can see I'm staying angled towards the Kutuzov, who's still firing AP at me. I think that was the KGV who fired HE. And the Prince Eugen's coming around the corner. Now here I know I'm about to run aground, so I have to show some broadside. This is risky, but given the situation, it's worthwhile. So I've got 45 seconds left. If I can get into the next bay, I can stay angled and survive. I'm firing at the Prince Eugen when I have the chance, not because I think I can kill him, just basically to annoy him and make him potentially reflexively run away. Again, he's firing AP, it's not a good idea. This is a situation where I probably could have got away with firing AP. I might have actually done somewhat significant damage to that Prince Eugen, but it's fine, it's not like I'm going to kill him. Now we're down to 5 seconds left. I angle up, run into the island, or run into the landmass, and tank the last salvo. Then that's a win. This was in fact my first ever solo warrior. So if you look at the results, 462,000 credits, almost a 250,000 damage, 21 fires set. I also got Confederate, Witherer, and High Caliber. If we go over to the team results, I was first with about 2,600 base XP. I also have to say that the Harakazi and the two destroyers did really well on our team. And on the enemy team, I have to send my commiserations to that King George V who got a Kraken but lost anyway. So if you look at the detailed report, you can see that I did a lot of damage to a lot of targets, but I wasn't able to transform those into kills very effectively, so that was a bit of a misplay, which did cause the situation that I was in at the end. I did about 75,000 damage to the King George V, but he survived regardless, and I also took about 1.8 million potential damage, which is very high for a Kutuzov. Finally, if we look at the credits and XP, I wasn't running a premium count, but I still made 336,000 there, and as well as decent XP. Okay, so after watching that video, or doing that video, I thought it was important to talk more about how important IFHE is on 152mm armed cruisers. So to start out, I'll look at the Chapayev, which is an appropriate ship because it has 152mm guns. So if we look at its armor, it's got lots of 25mm plating. Superstructure is 16mm, but most of it's covered in 25mm armor. Now, the way that HE penetration works in World of Warships is quite complicated. Basically, you divide your caliber by 6, unless you are German secondaries, German cruiser guns, or British battleships, which get caliber over 4. You then round it down, so 152mm divided by 3, or 6, is 25.3 or so. You round that down to 25. Now what that actually means is that any armor 25mm or greater will shatter your HE shells. So all of this armor in the Chapayev will actually shatter stock Chapayev shells. You can only do damage to the superstructure. If we now look at a Des Moines, the armor layout's very similar, but again it's got a lot of 27mm armor plating, which can be penetrated with IFHE. Superstructure is thicker or thinner, but you could penetrate that without IFHE. If we look at a tier 7 battleship, it's mostly covered in 25mm armor, which is only penetrable if you have IFHE. Superstructure is again thinner. If we then switch to a tier 8 battleship, most of it's covered in 32mm armor, but that is actually penetrable with IFHE, because if you multiply 25.3 by 1.3, you get just over 33, I think, which gives you enough penetration to get through 32mm. Montana doesn't actually get any thicker armor than the North Carolina, except in this amidships area, which does prevent a little bit of HE spam. If we look at a Royal Navy battleship, such as, for example, the Conqueror, we're probably going to see quite a bit of, So Conqueror has 32mm at the front and end, just like the Montana, but it actually has 32mm armor in the middle, which is vulnerable to IFHE, and it's also got a massive superstructure, so Royal Navy battleships tend to eat a lot of HE damage. Anyway, I hope that explains to you why IFHE is so useful, and you should probably run it on every cruiser with armament between 150 and 180mm, and you should also run it on the Atlanta and the Akatsuki as well.